welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm making yet another Hollow Knight Lightbox. So let's just get right into it. So I wanted to do something different for this Lightbox. So instead of doing an area of the game like I did before, I chose to do a boss fight. And I chose to do Grimm because I really wanted to do something red. And Grimm is a really cool boss as well, so I thought he would be the perfect one. I wanted this light box to be smaller and have less layers than the others, so I just got some cardstock and I cut those sheets in half. I draw a half-inch border along the whole entire paper and then I just start on the first layer. So I start with the floor and I just draw out all the details on that, and I move on to the banner that's hanging from the ceiling. I just draw it out, draw Grimm's mark on it, and then I move on to Grimm himself and I just start drawing him out, and I'm super nervous about this because I really wanted to make sure he looked as close as possible to the game. Because for this Lightbox, I didn't want to change anything about it. I think the boss fight looks cool itself, and that's the whole point of the Lightbox, is to draw the boss fight. So I didn't want to change anything, and I just took a lot of care to draw him as accurately as possible. And I do the same with the knight, just draw them out the best I can, and then I move on to cutting them out. So I was just super careful when I cut out all the details on his face and his body and his legs, and there were a couple times when I got so close to ripping him and I was so scared, but luckily none of that happened and I cut him out without much trouble. Then I move on to the knight and I cut him out without any trouble at all. He was super easy. And after I finish cutting him out, I move on to the ground. And for the ground, I had drawn these like weird loopy, like semicircular like details. I don't know what they're called, but whatever. And they were just like that in the game, and I just cut those out. And I also did the banner or the flag at the very top, and I just cut out little details, and that was it. So then I just move on to the next layer, which is the wall at the arena, and I just do a rough sketch of how I want everything to go, plan out, space everything out, all that stuff, and then I do a proper sketch later. And this was pretty tricky to figure out because I wanted to preserve all the details of the wall, but I also wanted to make the light come from the wall, because in light boxes, typically the light comes from the background, but in Grimm's fight, the background is really dark and all the light is in the front. So I wanted to make the light come from this wall. So at first I had planned that I was going to leave this wall intact and I was just going to draw on all the details with the pencil and then trace the lines, I guess, with my knife to just cut the little slits for the details. But since I wanted the light from there, I had to figure out what parts I was going to cut out, which was a little tricky, but I think I did a good job figuring that out. Cutting out the arches between the flags was a little tricky because they were super thin details, but I managed to do it all without ripping anything. And just to add a little bit more detail to the posts, I went with my knife and I just cut teeny tiny little slits all along the post. And for the ceiling, I just drew out a flag and then a light, and this light, I just drew out the shape of it. I wasn't sure how I was going to cut it out or do any of the details, so I just drew out the shape and I cut around it, and I will go back and add details in it later. But yeah, that's it for this layer. And next I move on to the first layer of bugs sitting in the stands, and I just start out with tracing where the wall is so I know where all the bugs will go, and then I just start drawing in the bugs. So there are 3 different types of bugs sitting in the stands. First there are these fat ones that have 2 horns, then there are these ones that are like big and they have a long face, and then there are these tiny ones that look like a little gnome. So I just start drawing out bugs everywhere, and I have a reference photo at hand so I can see where to place them so the right bugs are in the right spots, and yeah. So once I finish drawing them all out and adding all the details, I start cutting them out. And then I move on to cutting out all the details on the bugs' faces, and I have to be really careful because all the details were really thin, especially on the really tiny bugs because they had such small faces. But yeah, I just did that. And after that, I just cut out the holes on the bottom so the light will get through. So once I'm done cutting out this whole layer, I take some parchment paper and I flip the page over and I glue the parchment paper behind the bugs' faces so that the light will be diffused. And then I move on to the next layer, which is just more bugs, and I start by drawing where the wall is, just like in the previous layer, and I drew a bunch of bugs and the drapes in the background because there were a couple drapes in the background. And I drew more of the long-faced big bugs because those were more in the background. And I just start on cutting everything out, and I just do the same as previously. Cut out the faces, put the parchment paper behind everything, and yeah. And then I go back to the first wall layer that has all the details cut out of it, and I just take some parchment paper for that too, and I glue it behind everything just to diffuse the light. And then I move on to yet another layer of bugs, and this is the same as everything else, but I did forget to mention that for each new layer of bugs, I'm making them sit a little bit higher just so they show above all the others. And I added some more drapes because there were more drapes, and everything else is basically the same. And then I just move on to the very last layer of bugs, and I kind of wish I would have put more bugs on this layer, but it doesn't end up mattering in the end, you'll see. But yeah, I just end up finishing this layer with the parchment paper behind the bugs' faces, and then after that I move on to the very last layer of drapes, and this is just a single layer with just drapes, nothing else, and it was super simple to cut out. And after I finished that, I moved on to the very front layer, which would be the framing layer, and I just drew out the flag and then a little floor piece, I guess. It was like a little bump in the middle. And yeah, I just drew those out, cut them out nicely, and I was ready to assemble. So I started assembling it from the front to the back, which I never do, so I don't know why I did it now, but I wish I had done it a different way. I wish I would have started at the last layer and then worked my way forward instead of this way, because the paper can warp a lot more in the front, which you don't want because you want the front to be nice. But I don't know, I started on the front and yeah, I kind of regret that, but oh well. And then I just assemble it how I always do, with the foam board between the layers. And if you notice, near the end when I get to the audience, I leave out a couple foam board between the layers, and I just glue two layers like on top of each other. And I wanted to do that because I wanted the bugs to seem more like closely packed. So for the box, instead of making one, I decided to go to Hobby Lobby and find one, and I ended up finding one that was pretty good. It was a little bit smaller than what I needed, but I thought I would be able to just shave off a little from the sides of my light box, and it would fit in there super nicely. So I bought it, and then I go home to put it together, and I realize it's way too small. So what do? I end up remaking my entire light box to fit the box, and yeah. So then I just put it into the box and it fit pretty snugly, and then I got the LEDs and I put them in the back. I just ended up sticking them in there. I probably should have organized them a little better, but it worked, and then I just put the back on and it is pretty much done. So yeah. Overall, I'm really happy with how it turned out. There are a couple things I probably would change about it, and obviously, if I didn't have to remake it, that would be better. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy. And the only thing is, in this clip, The lights look very yellowy, but in reality they're not yellowy at all. I guess the camera just picked up on the yellow in it. But yeah, and I've had quite a few people ask me like if they can buy these light boxes or where can they buy them, and I said I would have a store up where you could buy them, but it's not up yet because I want to make sure I can make the boxes super nice and everything. So once I figure all that out, I'll have a store up, if anyone's interested.